A Prime Minister was mid-sentence across from Queen Elizabeth II at Buckingham Palace, when her hand simply went still on the arm of the chair, and the footman by the door watched a seasoned politician start talking faster and faster to fill a silence she had opened on purpose. If this account has been useful, subscribing costs nothing, and more stories like this one are queued. The bell notification means you will see them. The footman did not move. Protocol held him there, a few feet from the two of them, back straight, eyes forward, a piece of the furniture that happened to breathe. He had set the tea. He had heard the door close, and now he stood and watched the most powerful elected man in the country come apart over nothing at all. Because that was the thing. Nothing had happened. She had not frowned. She had not interrupted. Her hand had been resting on the carved arm of the chair, and then it had stopped resting and started being still, which is a different thing entirely, and the room had changed temperature. The Prime Minister felt it before he understood it. His sentences got quicker. He reached for a second point before he had finished the first. He was, the footman said later, filling a hole she had dug, and then quietly stepped back from. Watch what her hands are doing in every photograph after this, and you will start to see it too. The stillness was never nothing. When that footman described the scene years on, he did not reach for a grand word. He said it plainly. That pause was not her hesitating. That pause was the Queen governing. In a room where governing was the one thing she was forbidden to do, she had just done it, and the man across from her would leave convinced he had run the meeting. To understand how a woman ends up governing with her hand, you have to go back to the girl who never expected the job. She became queen in 1952. She was 25 years old. There was no long apprenticeship, no gentle handover. Her father, King George VI, died in the night, his lungs worn out, and a young woman who had gone to sleep, a princess, woke as the sovereign of a quarter of the world. She was abroad when it happened. She flew home in black. Nothing about that arrival was ready. Yes, she had been trained. Her grandmother, Queen Mary, upright and severe and old enough to remember a different century, had drilled her in the machinery of the thing. How a monarch stands, what a monarch signs, when a monarch stays silent. There had been long hours with private tutors, constitutional history, the dull spine of duty. All of it was preparation for the role. None of it was preparation for the exposure. Nothing prepares a person to be read by the whole world every single day for the rest of their life. Every glance photographed, every flicker of the mouth studied by millions for a meaning it might not even have. Ask yourself how you would survive being looked at like that, hour after hour, for decades. She found an answer almost no one else could copy. She learned to be unreadable. Think about what everyone else in her position did. They performed. They gave the crowd a face to love. Elizabeth did the opposite, and she did it on purpose. The public got a woman in bright coats waving from a balcony, warm and blank and endlessly reproducible on a stamp. The private woman, the one the staff actually served, was watching you far more closely than you were watching her, and giving almost nothing back. The men who moved through her rooms were the first to sense it, not the ministers who came and went, the staff, the ones who set the fire, laid the papers, drew the curtains, and withdrew. They started to notice something that unsettled them, and they could not quite put a finger on it. She seemed to have decided things before anyone had spoken. A minister would arrive with an argument, warmed up, ready to persuade, and there would already be a quality in the room, a sense that she had walked 3 steps down the road he was only just setting out on. She rarely argued. She almost never contradicted. And yet, again and again, the men who watched from the edges came away with the same strange feeling, that the outcome had somehow been settled before the conversation started. How? None of them could say. Not yet. The footman standing by the door caught these edges better than anyone, because he was there for the part no one else saw. The wave, the speech, the balcony, all of that was public. This was not. Once a week, one man was let into a room with her, and the door was closed behind him. No aides, no secretary in the corner taking notes, no recording. Across her reign, 15 of them made that walk, Prime Minister after Prime Minister, from Winston Churchill all the way to Liz Truss in the final days. 15 of the most guarded people in public life, sitting down alone with her, with no minutes taken and no witnesses beyond the footman who set the room and left. And the footman caught the edges. Starting with the afternoon, Harold Wilson talked himself in circles, while the Queen watched one fixed point on the carpet. Wilson kept talking, pipe in hand, gesturing, building his case sentence by careful sentence, and the Queen let him build it. She watched that one spot on the floor. A footman set the tea down, stepped back to the door, and stood there the way protocol demanded, and in all of it, Harold Wilson never noticed the obvious thing. She had stopped needing his words several minutes earlier. He was still assembling an argument. She was already 3 moves past it. The footman who told this story years later said he had no proof of what was going on in her head. He only caught the edges. But he had watched enough of these afternoons to know the difference between a woman waiting to be convinced and a woman waiting for a man to finish. To understand what he was watching, you have to understand the room itself. Once a week, on a Wednesday evening, the Prime Minister of the day came to Buckingham Palace and sat down alone with the Queen. 15 Prime Ministers did this across her reign, from Winston Churchill, who bowed to her as a young woman in the early 1950s, to Liz Truss, who came to her in the last days of her life. No minutes taken, no secretary in the corner, no recording of any kind. The only people who ever saw the inside of it were the men who arranged the chairs, laid out the 2 teacups, and withdrew. It was, in a very real sense, the most sealed room in the British state, and the footmen were the only living witnesses to its temperature. Think about the span of that for a moment. The men who walked through those gates changed with the decades. Different hair, different parties, different crises waiting on their desks. The gates opened for one, then for the next, then for the next. 14 handovers at the very top of British politics. And the woman waiting inside was the one thing that never changed. Every one of them was new to the job. She never was. What the footman caught over the years were her instruments. The first was a look. She would hold a glance a single beat longer than a glance is meant to last, just long enough that the man across from her felt measured, weighed, filed away somewhere. Nothing hostile in it. That was the unnerving part. One footman said you could watch a confident minister feel it land and not quite know what had touched him. The second was a question. She would ask it softly once and then let it go. She never asked it a second time. Think of the last time someone let a question just sit there until you finally answered it. Now imagine her doing that to the Prime Minister. He could answer it, or he could dodge it. But if he dodged it, he knew, privately, that he had dodged it because she had not forgotten, and neither had he. The question stayed in the room whether he touched it or not. The third instrument was the one the men remembered longest. She would open a silence and simply decline to close it. Most people cannot bear an open silence across a table. They rush in to fill it. So a self-assured man, mid-argument, would reach the end of a thought, expect a reply, and get nothing back, just her stillness, the tea going cold, and the footman by the door pretending to see none of it. And the man would start talking again, faster now. He would begin to sweat and to over-explain and to hand over more than he had ever planned to, all of it to close a gap she had opened on purpose, and had no intention of closing for him. Here is what unsettled the footmen when they compared notes below stairs. She almost never argued. She almost never contradicted a minister to his face. By the strict rules of her position, she had no right to. And yet, again and again, the men came away with the same feeling, that she had reached the end of the conversation before it had properly begun. If you have ever sat across from someone and sensed they already knew your answer, you have felt a thin slice of what these men described, week after week, decade after decade. And that was the thing none of them could explain. They could see the effect in every room she entered. The minister who arrived certain and left uncertain. The confident man who did most of the talking and somehow, quietly, lost the exchange. They could see it everywhere and account for it nowhere, because the woman doing this was, by the letter of her role, forbidden from ruling. She could not take a side. She could not tell a prime minister he was wrong. She held no vote and gave no orders. So how was a person with no power to command so plainly the master of every room she walked into? The footmen turned it over among themselves for years and never landed on an answer, and every one of them was looking in the wrong place. They studied her hands, her glances, the long silences in that Wednesday room, and they missed the same thing every single time. The reason she was always 3 moves ahead was not in the audience room at all. It was in what she did completely alone, every single night, long after the last of them had bowed and gone. Alone. Every night after the last of them had bowed and gone, the boxes came. Long cases of red leather, filled with the day's government papers, carried up to her rooms and set beside a single chair under a reading lamp. And she read them. Not skimmed. Read. Every state cable, every cabinet note, every secret a minister might have hoped to summarize for her in the morning. This went on quietly. For 70 years. The biographers who studied that habit reached a conclusion the sweating politicians never did. Everyone assumed she was guessing well. Hold that thought, because the truth is almost the opposite. She was not instinctive. She was the most briefed person in the country. While her prime ministers slept, she sat with the papers they had only half finished, and by the time they arrived for the weekly audience, she had already been through the whole file. They came to explain the situation to her. She had understood it the night before. That is the answer to the thing that unsettled the men who served her. How did a woman who almost never argued always seem to have decided first? Because the deciding happened here, in a quiet room, with a lamp and a stack of paper and nobody watching. The silence she opened in those audiences was never empty. It was full. Full of everything she had read and weighed and set aside, and she simply declined to spend it. She let the minister talk because she already knew where he was going. The pause was not her thinking. It was her waiting for him to catch up. And here is the part that turns quiet homework into something sharper. She was not allowed to rule. The job forbade it. A British monarch cannot take a side, cannot cast a vote, cannot tell the country what she thinks. Whatever Elizabeth believed about Suez, about Europe, about any of the crises that crossed her desk across 7 decades, she was bound to keep it off her face. Restraint was not a temperament handed to a naturally calm young woman. It was the one instrument the role actually let her pick up. So she picked it up, and she sharpened it. For a lifetime she honed that single tool until stillness could do the work a speech never could. A hand going still on the arm of a chair said more, in the right room, at the right moment, than any statement she was forbidden to make out loud. The public got the other version, the wave from the balcony, the speeches read from a card in that careful, level voice. That was the image the cameras adored, and it was true as far as it went. It simply went nowhere near the real thing. The real work was what they were pointing at and could not see. If a channel like this one is worth a few minutes of your evening, subscribing costs nothing, and the bell means the next of these stories finds you before anyone tells you it exists. More of them are already lined up. Now go back to that first scene with me and watch it land completely differently. A Prime Minister, mid-sentence, sitting across from the Queen at Buckingham Palace. Her hand goes still on the arm of the chair. She says nothing. The footman by the door, exactly where protocol put him, watches the man start talking faster, watches him reach for something to fill a silence he does not understand and cannot close. And when it is over, the Prime Minister rises, straightens his jacket, and leaves that room believing he led the meeting. He led nothing. She had read the file the night before. She let him fill the room while she watched and remembered. And somewhere inside that stillness, she had already understood the whole situation and chosen, deliberately, not to show it. He walked out feeling capable and in charge. He had been read front to back by a woman who never once raised her voice. That was the power. 70 years of cameras, more photographs taken of her than of almost any human being who has ever lived. And not one of them caught the thing that mattered. Not the crown, not the wave, not the words on the card, the pauses. The power lived in the pauses, and the only people standing close enough to see it were the ones with no vote and no voice of their own. The footmen, the men who carried the tea, held the door, set the room, and withdrew. They are the reason we know any of this. Not from a diary she left behind, because she left almost nothing. From the quiet accounts of staff and biographers who noticed what the official story kept leaving out. One recalled the hand on the chair. One recalled the red boxes under the lamp. Small things, each on its own. Put together, they describe a woman the public was told they knew and never actually met. So the next time a photograph of her crosses your screen, the balcony, the horses, the small handbag, the fixed and pleasant smile, look again. The stillness you were taught to read as an old woman being patient was something else entirely. It was the most prepared mind in Britain, deciding in the open, in front of everyone, exactly how little of itself to give away. They came away certain of the one thing the public was never meant to know. On one side, the crown and the wave and the speeches everyone remembers. On the other, a hand going still and a silence she opened on purpose. And the men a few feet away, quietly closing the audience room door as another Prime Minister walked out sure of himself, understood which one of those was the real power. She always knew more than she said.